All right. So let's get started. The sound is okay, right? Yeah, you can see me, Juan?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. All right. So thank you very much for the opportunity to have this panel discussion. Today we are talking about content language teaching from theory to practice. I have to tell you that this is a topic that really touches me. Yeah, I'm into this. This is one of my research fields. So for those who don't know me, my name is Lauren Galvan. I'm a full-time professor in the Licenciatura program. And well, in order to have a fruitful discussion on this matter, and each of our panelists brings a unique perspective based on their own experience, okay? And this will help us understand why educators all over the world have been implementing this dynamic in their classrooms. So Professor Herrera. Hi, Professor Herrera.
Good afternoon.
Hello. So welcome.
Hi everyone.
All right, very good. So Professor Romero. Professor
Hello.
Romero. All right, thank you so much. And our invitee, Professor Leon. Hello, Cindy.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for
Welcome.
the invitation.
Thank you so much for being here, dear all. So I would like to start saying that we all know that English has become an important asset, not only in education, right, but in economic and also political sectors. As a result, there is a need to adapt English language programs by the reevaluation of educational approaches, right, in order to improve what are teaching and pedagogy, right? In this sense, we need to constantly reflect and upon our practice as English educators, as English teachers, right? And simultaneously get acquainted with approaches that promote the learning of content and the learning of foreign language. So please, Professor Herrera, share with us how you've seen this transition between one methodology and the other throughout history. Can you please expand a little bit more on that?
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Professor Cindy and students. So, to question, I have to tell you something before. And this is, in the field of language acquisition, when we talk about content, we are talking about the teaching of non-linguistic subjects, like, for example, math, history, geography, and so on. So now let's know a little about the history of the teaching of content. So wait a second, please. I'm gonna share my screen. Where is that? Okay. Okay, here.
Yes, there's a green arrow pointing up, so you can.
Okay. So,
yes, there.
Okay, here. Can you see my screen, the timeline?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much. So, to answer Lorraine's question, I have to tell you that the really beginning of the teaching of content was not from the immersion programs of CDI or CLIL. It was far, very far from now. That is, let's track back 3,000 years before Christ, when the Akkadians' time, that is Mesopotamians' time. On those time, they want to learn about zoology, theology, biology. So they were not focused on those traditional methods that we have learned so far, like grammar and so on. They were teaching situations like, for example, those related with biology, zoology, and those kind of topics. So that was the really beginning of the teaching of content. However, I have to say that there was no, like, let's say something that was classified as a method in that time, something very useful for teaching languages. It was just the method they used and no more. It was just for the history and no more. So many years after that, in Canada, there was the necessity to learn French. You know, in Canada, they have these two languages, English and French, but not all Canadians speak French and speak English. Some of them just speak English and some others just French. That's why in the 1920s, some parents were worried about that, and they started like sending their children to schools where French was the language they used to teach subjects. So, but then it was just because parents were worried about that. But until the 1960s, it began the teaching of content in some schools. So those schools were named as immersion schools in Canada. And these immersion schools was just because, again, the social situation, economic situation, job opportunities require people that were competent in French. Then parents again send children to these kind of schools where the language used to teach was French. So they have immersion schools that were total immersion schools and partly immersion schools. So those total immersion school was just because 100% of the curriculum was delivered in the target language, that is, for example, French in this case. And partial immersion school was just because 50% of the curriculum was delivered in the target language. However, there are more about that. We have total immersion school, but yearly total immersion school and late total immersion school. Early because the children started learning the target language since they were in first grade. This is just to develop literacy skills, you know, reading and writing. Then we have late, which was some students that started learning the target language since they were in second, third, or high school. Okay, so that's what happened in Canada in the 1960s, immersion schools. And it proved that was really working. Their students were competent in French. And this impact around the world in the field of learning and teaching a language. So especially in the United States and in Europe. Then in Europe in the 1978, government was asking to the teaching of a second or a foreign language in schools. So they started like worrying about different methods to improve the teaching of the language. And teachers were noticing the impact that those immersion schools in Canada were having at that moment. So now I'm gonna just stop with Europe, not talking about what was happening in Europe, and I'm gonna concentrate in the United States. So what was happening in the United States after that? After the immersion programs, after notices that it was really working, the immersion schools. In the United States, you know that there are a lot of immigrants. And then in schools, they have to attend both native and non-native speakers. But non-native speakers were able to communicate their personal beliefs, thinkings, interpersonal communication. But in academic situation, they were not successful at all. So that's why it was like the beginning of the content-based instruction. Content-based instruction is like a variation of the thing of teaching for the communicative competence. You know, remember Hines with the communicative competence in the 1970s? Well, this was like the basis for that content-based instruction, just a variation of content. It was just to, communicative competence was like support for the development of the content. But then content was not really organized. For some teachers in the United States, the teaching of content was a theme or topic based. For others was sheltered instruction. For others they use ESP, English for a specific purpose. So they just
Mary, so sorry for interrupting. You mean there were not unique criteria?
Yeah, that's
All
right.
Okay.
That's what I'm trying to tell you. It was
super.
There was no organized method. Teachers do whatever they want, and there was not a method to follow, the strategies to follow, or techniques to follow. They just taught as they please, according to the subject they were teaching, according to the necessities. But then this, remember I told you 3 times of CDI: theme, topic-based, sheltered instruction, and then we have ESP. Well, we have here sheltered instruction, which was then the beginning of SIOP, which they are very related, but they are different, okay? So in the 1990s, it's like the starting point for the SIOP approach. These 3 researchers, Echevarria, Bach, and Short, they observed what you just mentioned, Lorraine. It was a disaster. I mean, the teachers just started the class and delivered the class as they wanted, as they thought was the best way to do it. So they decide to research about different methodologies teachers around the United States were using. And they travel around the United States, observing teachers, observing what was really working and what was not really working when teaching content. So remember that we are in the United States and we have non-native speakers, a lot of immigrants. They were not successful in learning these subjects just because of their language. And something that really it's relevant. I mean, a story they mention in the book, Making Content Comprehensible, is that when they observe history classes, students were no motivators toward the class. They were not interested about the class. Sometimes the students just opened the book and what they saw on those books was blocks of text with no supporting for that text. I mean, the text was not scaffolded in any way. The teaching was not scaffolded. The teacher just delivered the class as all of them were native speakers. And that was an impact to the external exams. And this is like the problem that helps or helped Echevarria, Bock, and Short to develop the SIOP model. Because, you know, in the United States, they have to present or they have this external exam as we have in Colombia, the Prueba Saber. So the results of that external exam were not very good, especially for non-native speakers. And that was like the reason why Echevarria said, okay, we have to do something. Something is happening. And it is because of their language. And teachers are just delivering the classes as all of them were native speakers, but they're not. And the story I was telling to you about the history class in which students didn't have motivation towards the class and the books were just full of blocks of text and there was no scaffolding support. In contrast, they observe that in science class, they have, let's say, students more motivators towards the class, and they have a lot of hands-on practice. Students really enjoy the class. The methodology was different. So the same student had a different attitude towards history classes and with the science classes. And at the end, they, let's say, define 7 features and 8 components for this model, SIOP models. So they designed this model, which started in 1990, but it continues until, I think, 1996, because it was just the beginning. They observe, they classify, they decide, they organize what they have observed. And the features, these 7 features were, let's say, lesson delivery, lesson preparation, build the background, comprehensible input, strategies, review and assessment. So they really did a great job, these 3 researchers, with the SIOP models. They care about everything around in the classroom. So what they did was just to give this model or protocol, because at the beginning it was just named protocol, to the teachers they observe, and they say, okay, apply this and give me some feedback about this. And that was the way a SIOP model started, which is a really great and complete model. Okay, that was happening in the United States. While that was happening in the United States, in Europe, we have a different situation. So the government was asking for more. I was asking to the teaching of a second language or a foreign language in their schools. So it was until the 1994 that David Marsh, let's socialize, because this was not the beginning of CLIL. The CLIL approach have started some years ago, but it was until 1994 until they say, okay, we have this method, CLIL. And then what we want to do is to develop both at the same time, content and language. So, but I have to tell you something, when they mention, especially with the SIOP model, language, they don't refer like to the teaching of grammar. What they are talking about is about the teaching of, or the development of the 4 skills, vocabulary, pronunciation, and so on. It's not about grammar aspects rather than the development of the 4 skills. So David Marsh support this theory on these methods on Krashen theory. Remember Krashen with the comprehensible input. This Krashen was the same author of the natural approach. So Krashen was very important at the moment to the creation of this CLIL method. Then we have the communicative approach that also was a support for this CLIL method, and the immersion schools in Canada also helped David Marsh to develop this CLIL method. Well, it was just a short history about how the teaching of content just bore around the world.
So what a complete timeline. Thank you so much, Mary. So Mary, following your ideas, can we see CLIL or content and language integrated learning at the starting point of the new methodology for language teaching, or not?
Well, I have to say that the real starting point was the immersion schools in Canada. Well, it was the real starting point, because the immersion progress was which impact all around the world. But then the 2 methods, I have to say methods, because even though SIOP it is a model, it's a method that really are really organized, are in the United States SIOP, and in Europe CLIL. So I have to say that the beginning was the immersion programs, was like the umbrella. However, nowadays, CLIL is becoming the umbrella for the others methods.
Okay, great. Yeah, because of the different methods or techniques that this approach implies, right? So let's talk about Colombian context. Okay, so you know that in Colombia there have been programs developed by the government to foster English language learning, such as Colombia Bilingüe, accompanied by the basic learning rights or derechos básicos de aprendizaje. So based on your experience, Mary, in the public sector, which method or well, which approaches or which methods that you just described or that you just mentioned might meet the reality of your school?
Okay, so, well, I have to tell you first that what government is asking teachers is to apply the communicative approach. Focus on, let's say, from 6th to 7th grade, task-based. From 8th to 9th grade, the problem-based. And from 10th to 11th grade is problem-based. And the way they present it is that divided into 4 different topics. But these 4 main topics are related to different subjects, let's say. For example, healthy, the other is, I don't remember, it's related all of them 4 topics. The one is healthy, and the other is like the context. Environment is the other one, environment. Well, it's trying to do some kind of clear because they divide these 4 topics to subjects, different subjects. However, when you start like observing and analyzing the books they gave to some teachers in schools, you're gonna find that some of the information is related to topics of different subjects, but there is still a lot of grammar inside of it. So what is not clear, okay? In my school, so we try to follow this. However, it's a combination of different methods. We include what government is saying to us to do, but with what our preferences when teaching. In my case, is the development of the 4 skills. So I still follow the communicative competence, the development of the 4 skills, but the topics I select for my classes are topics about different subjects.
All right, that would be a topic-based instruction, right?
It's a combination of many things because I try to follow what government is telling to me to do.
But also considering the reality.
Yeah, and my necessity, my context. So I try to do it communicative, but at the same time, I use topics relating to different subjects. So it's a combination of both.
All right. Thank you so much, Professor, for your thoughts on this field. Now we are eager to listen to Professor Romero, since one of his research fields is CLE, is content and language integrated learning. And so, Profe, in content and language integrated learning, there is a focus not only on content and not only on language, right? So can we define this approach as an innovative fusion of both? I mean, language and learning and language and content. So what's your point of view? How do you define CLE? Profe Romero, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Okay, welcome professors and students. Okay, my name is Jorge Romero and I'm a professor in the Licenciatura program. Nice to meet you all. Okay, So yes, as you were saying, clear approach. Yes. Why an approach? Because it is based on some beliefs and conceptions about how people best learned a language, right? Or at least improve their competences on it. So what are we doing now is that we're going to go, okay, throughout some features, right? Something that I want to emphasize on is that it is a very complex approach. So I don't have like enough time to show you like all the aspects, but I'm going to show you the most relevant ones, right? The
Yeah, the
first,
main elements is okay.
exactly. The first thing I would like to talk about is the term of integration, right? Because it is called content and language integrated learning. Something quite important here is that something that happens when it comes to teaching, right? When it comes to English teachers, is that we might get confused and emphasize more on the language, I mean English, than on content. So the proposal is to focus on both, right? Not only on the teaching of language itself, but also on the teaching of content, right? Regarding CLIL's settings, right? It works on a 4-6 framework, right? Which comprises, of course, communication, content, culture, and cognition. Okay, they work together, they don't work separately. So we're going to see how these C work, right? And why and what they aim at. First, I would like to start with the first C that has to do with C4. I don't know if you're able to see the presentation. I don't know what's going on
Yes,
here.
yes. We have like a triangle. Yeah, we can see. I mean, yeah,
Okay,
now
perfect.
content.
The first one I'm going to talk about is C, okay? C for content. It has to do mainly with those sophisticated and obligatory content words that the students are supposed to learn, right? Something very important, in these clear settings, students need to have a certain level in order to start learning this new content, right? They are going to be learning words that they don't see right in their English classes, or maybe they are not like 100% familiarized with, right? But content is not about giving students words. That's exactly like English teachers need, right? We need like a guide, because in some cases, we believe that teaching content is about providing students, okay, a range of sophisticated words and exceed. When it comes to clear, cipher content has to do with developing new learning experiences, right? How students use these words in order to construct knowledge and in order to use this knowledge in, to solve to solve problems, right? I want to show you this example. Yes, for example, in a science class, right? The content that the students are going to be dealing with is types of habitat, animals and the habitats. So that's exactly the words that they are going to be dealing with. But however, for example, if they are learning about photosynthesis, they are supposed to understand that it is not only a word, a term, a science term. They are supposed to identify and to analyze that photosynthesis is also a process, right, that plants produce in order to, okay, that the plants do in order to produce their own food, right? So that's mainly what C for content is for. It's not about words, it is also about what the students do with the acquisition and learning of those words, right? The second C has to do with
So, Professor,
communication.
sorry for interrupting. Before you go into communication, we can conclude that content is new understanding and skills that the students need to let's say reach at the end of the class or at the end of this semester, at the end of that period, right? So new
Exactly.
understanding and new skills.
Exactly. Skills that maybe at the very beginning, because students, when they start with these new clear settings, right, they have a basic language that is the language that they use to participate in everyday life situations, right? And undoubtedly what you're saying is like that, right? New skills, new understanding, but regarding to a specific subject that they are learning. In this case, for example, science. I mean, the example that I just showed you, right? The second C has to do with communication. It is mainly related to the language itself, right? Let's pay attention to this quotation. It says, learning to use language and using the language to learn, right? Students are going to be using this language, for example, in our case, English, to learn the new content. But this new content requires them to develop like that very specific language that they need in order to participate in the debates that they have in the class, right? Based on that, this C for communication has two very important aspects. Number one, it is a language structure, right? That has mainly three components. As you can see here, it has language of learning, language for learning, and language through learning. As you can see here, for example, when we talk about language of learning, we're talking about those keywords, terminologies that the students need. For example, in a science class, plants, sound, light, right, fruits, etc. So that's exactly also those keywords related to the terminologies that I was mentioning in order to participate in the debates, right? But the second one has to do with language for learning, right? For example, I have the words that I need to learn, right? But that words demands to have a certain, right, language or sophisticated phrases. For example, if we are going to talk about an experiment, right? Maybe we're going to mention the ingredients or maybe the materials, the tools that we're going to be used. But when we're going to describe the step-by-step, it's going to require students to have, for example, like a listing, a language for listing, for example, that they understand that when we're going to talk about instructions, tips, or a recipe, they are supposed to use first, second, third, and that is
like the
mainly
sequence, right?
exactly like a sequence, language for sequencing, language for listing, language for describing. For example, if they are going to compare, for example, living and non-living things, it's going to require them to have language for comparing, but it is not related to the subject itself. It is related for comparison, right? I believe, I think, it is longer, it is bigger, etc. Right? As the example that I'm just providing here. Also, there are some grammatical, right, structures that they may use, right? According, for example, in a class where they are learning about matter and how it changes, right? Matter changes. They are, for example, is what we call the first or the zero conditional, right? For example, if you put ice on the fridge, it freezes up, right? So quite important to keep that into consideration. The third one has to do with language through learning. That's mainly, right, related to the students, and they are like the responsible ones to develop that language, right? But how it is developed, it's quite important that is the teacher who provides, opportunities, activities, and scenarios for students to develop that. For example, when you have them work on a glossary, when you have them prepare like a poster presentation, right? They are going to search for words that they may be using, but the teacher is not going to give them the words. They are supposed to investigate, to research, and that's why that language through learning becomes very, very relevant in these clear, settings, right? For example, language to build arguments, and disagreements. So in that case, students are just doing that based on what they believe or what they search using technology or using other classmates' opinions, right? So the teacher is not providing the tools for them to develop this. They are just providing opportunities for a student to develop and work and improve this language, right? For example, dictionary skills, using feedback, presenting evidence. So this is going to require students to have a language that maybe the teacher is not teaching them, but is providing, opportunities for them to develop this, right? Something related to this part that it's really amazing, and it is very related to language through, is that students use the repertoire of languages that they use. For example, we have co-mixing, right? It's like using, for example, I'm going to be talking here. I'm going to say some word in Espanol and continue talking. So I'm using some words in my mother tongue. And in case I speak a third language and like taking some borrowings from those languages in order to express something. Is that what most of the students do when they don't know a word? Code switching is about, changing from one language to another one. Por ejemplo, como yo puedo empezar a hacerlo ahora en este momento. And that's an amazing ability that bilinguals have, right? And translanguaging, that's really amazing. For example, in these immersion programs, there were some students, the immersion programs that Professor Herrera was mentioning, there were some students that speak more than 3 and even 4 languages. And they were supposed to use all those languages to communicate with other students, to investigate. Trust languages about using my language repertoire. For example, if I speak 5 languages, I'm going to use them, all of them, okay, as a resource to understand something, to apply something, etc. And the other thing that I want to talk about regarding languages is the transition that students go through. It's what we call scaffolding process. Es un proceso de andamiaje, right? They start with these basic interpersonal communicative skills. Later, they go into a more sophisticated language, but it's mainly related to the subject that they are learning. For example, that we have here, they in the English classes that they take, they're supposed to maybe learn things like I see the sun when I go to school or when I'm coming back, etc. But that sophisticated language has to do exactly with the non-linguistic subject that they are learning. So that's exactly mainly what CIFRE communication comprises. I don't know if you have any question, Mr. Jovan, or something like that regarding that CIFRE communication, or can I move on?
Well, I have oh, okay, here we have Mr. Vasquez, Carlos Vasquez. So can you please turn on your microphone? And you ask, probably he has a question.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Romero, for such a nice presentation. I have a question related to something that you mentioned regarding the student's level. If a student don't have the right level of English, or the one that should be expected to be in that context, how can I use the CLIL? Should I change it, or there is a upper grade of CLIL, there's a lower grade of CLIL, or should I implement a new strategy, a new methodology to reach to those students that maybe don't have the level maybe required for that context?
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, something quite important and very meaningful in this setting is that as in our English classes, we may have students that they don't have like the same level, right? But is the teacher, right, through the scaffolding process, we start working with them, providing them, opportunities for them to improve and to use the language. Something very remarkable here is that the CLIL I'm talking about is a soft CLIL used to teach content. However, it is there is this soft CLIL. I'm talking about a hard CLIL used for content teaching, but there is a soft CLIL that it is based on topics and themes for students to learn English, right? Of course, they may, for example, talking about in our contest, right? In our Colombian contents, students, they have, their English classes, right? Different from the contents class. For example, they're taking their science class. In this case, so what is recommended is that the content teachers must work together with the English teacher, right? In line with that, right, they may share strategies for these students to have not the best level, but the appropriate level to participate in these CLIL scenarios.
Great. Thank you so much, Profe Romero. Well, I consider that your explanation was quite complete. So thank you so much. Now we are aware of the language triptych, talking about language for, language of, and language through. Very good. Thank you so much for that contribution. So now I would like to welcome Miss Leon. So Miss Leon, hello.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, Miss. So, Miss, for you, I have this special question. So, as far as I know, you're teaching kindergarten students, right? You have the opportunity to teach kindergarten, and you have had the opportunity to teach fifth graders, right? Fifth
Yes, of
graders
course.
as well. Okay, so this is all important because we can see the difference between the two, right? So, as far as I know, and the most typical, let's say, models or methods found with little children often involve, like games, like those dynamics, and other play-based activities, like ludic approach, right? Where the main focus is on singing, they like to play, that they like drawing. So based on this, and based on your meaningful experience, Miss, in this private institution, how can we evidence clear approach with these kindergarten students? Can you please tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, thank you, Lorraine, for the invitation and for the question. And yes, I need to be honest. At the very beginning, it was very difficult. It was a challenge for me to adapt it, the CLIO method for my students. But nowadays, I can say that it works. How can I say this? Because first of all, I realize and I know that my students are very curious. They are all the time asking for questions about the word, about the things that they see. So I try to use these elements for my class. So in the class, first of all, I think about the content. And for example, if I'm going to teach something related to science in English, what I do is that I try that my students pretend doing something. For example, if they are learning about animals, they try to imitate sounds about animals, and I teach them just vocabulary. I don't teach them, for example, phrases or something like that. I just focus at the very beginning on the vocabulary. So I have seen that this works a lot with my students. Also, for example, if they are learning about body parts, so I asked them to bring something related to the elements like shampoo or, for example, a comb. So they imitate that they are combing their hair. And they repeat the words all the time because they learn by repetition. Here I can evidence the content, the communication, because they try to communicate using words, and the culture, because they are aware of what they are doing. For example, if I tell them, please comb your hair, so they do it. So I can realize that they are learning like that.
Great, great. So that could be like total physical response as well, right? So they listen to you, but because they are in a silent period, they do the actions based on what you indicate, right?
Yes,
So
and it's
awesome.
very funny, Lorraine, because they try to imitate what I'm doing in the classroom.
I
Sometimes
imagine.
I can see that there are some students that imitate like the teachers are what the teachers are doing in the classroom. So it's a kind of interesting thing.
Great, great. And I also have this question for you, Miss Cindy. So why is CLIL good for you as a teacher? I mean,
Okay.
what would be like the main benefits that CLIL brings to you as a teacher?
Okay. Well, I would like to share some slides. I don't know if Professor
Cool.
Jorge has the slides there.
Give me a second. I'm working on it, okay?
Okay, perfect. Well, I'm going to tell you that one of the benefits as a teacher is that we have different challenges. And the first one is that we can innovate with methods, materials, and e-learning. For example, during the pandemic situation, I could realize that with the e-learning method, I could teach my students with different tools, with different games. And this is really related to the communication and to the content in the CLIO. That is one of the benefits, the use of methods, materials, and e-learning. The second one is that provides individual and international networking opportunities and professional mobility. I can say that I have been in different projects related, for example, to science. I'm not a science teacher, but I became a science teacher with the CLIO.
Oh,
I needed to learn again a little bit about the biology, about science, and it was amazing. It was a challenge because at the beginning I didn't know how to plan my classes, taking into account the different situations that we have in a classroom. We have students with different learning styles, with special needs. So I tried to do my best just for my students.
Yeah, because I imagine that there are a lot of things to look at, right? It's not only like one element, but different things in the classroom, different learning styles. And this is an innovative approach that, well, it's useful, but at the same time, it's challenging and demanding, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes, that is the second one. And also we can improve or we can enhance our practices through cooperation with other teachers. With this CLIO method, I get to know teachers from other cities, and I could have a great experience with them, sharing the experience that I had in my classroom, and I learned a lot about it.
Awesome. Great. Okay. So now Mr. Lemus is gonna share his screen, but in the meanwhile, I have also this question. Now that you mentioned that you had the opportunity to talk to different teachers, let's say around the world, would you like to share an example of the impact of CLIL in your classes? Well, considering, you know, culture, because, well, you were exchanging some meaning, you were exchanging some experiences, some context. So yes, what can you tell us about that?
Yes, for example, in one of the projects related to science, my students talk about the different things. For example, they went out the classroom and they walk around the school, and they were learning about living things and not living things, for example. And they took some notes about what they saw at that moment. So every day, what I do is that my students get connected with the real context, because that is what they are going to need later. So first of all, what I do is to teach them about the real context. Not, for example, if we are talking about the nature, they see or they walk around the classroom, around outside the classroom as well, because all the time we don't need to stay at the same classroom. We can go out with our students and show them something different, and they get very motivated with that.
I imagine. Very good. I don't know if you have some picture that we can see, Miss Cindy, so that you know, that you show how they were like interacting with the environment, or probably completing a task, but not inside the classroom, but outside. Oh, look.
Yes, that is one of the pictures that I would like to share with you. The first one is when I taught my students about living things and not living things, and they did a list about what they saw in the school. The school is very big with a lot of animals, a lot of trees, so they were very happy when they went outside the classroom. So here we can see it. And the second one is a picture about the science fair. They learned science in English. And here, some of the students are talking about magnetism, and they create the questions inside the classroom with my help, and they create this project. The
Wow,
third
that's
one,
great.
it was this is a picture about about an activity that we did, a project with Ondas Colciencias here in Colombia. And they participated with this in Ecoparque. They saw some birds and some animals, and they took notes about it.
Wow. So as part, Miss Cindy, as the content that they were dealing with, right? That you were teaching them in the classroom.
Exactly.
So very good. Okay.
And the last one was another project that they created inside the classroom with about lungs. So here, this is like an imitation about that, how does it work with this system, the respiratory system.
Also, notice how they are experiencing manipulating things, manipulating objects, materials, right? In other words, applying the content, I mean, the academic content. So very good. And how do you deal with grammar, Miss Cindy? Because, well, they need to interact, they need to communicate, right? But do you think it's important to reinforce grammar at this stage?
Yes, it's important, but is, for example, here, could you scroll down, please? Here, this is one of my preparation, one of my lesson plan. And what I do is that I don't teach grammar all the time. And when I teach, for example, grammar is through phrases. They repeat and repeat. And they realize about, for example, if we are talking about the ailments and remedies, they use some expressions, just expressions, not, for example, this is the subject, this is the verb, because I know that this is a kind of difficult for the students. And what I want is to teach them functional language. Okay, functional language means that is in real context. And for example, this is an activity about healthy habits, healthy body. And the first thing in the preparation, that is a warm-up, is about a trip to the nurse office. So they go to the nurse or doctor in the school, and they talk with the nurse, not in English, because in this case, the nurse doesn't speak English. But then in the classroom, I ask them about some questions related to what they talk with the nurse.
Great. So they were moving around. Very
Yes.
good, because it's not only to give that traditional class in the room, in the classroom, but let them, let them move, right? Let them explore. Very good. Excellent. So then we have the development.
Yes, in the development, this is in the classroom, and I divided, for example, ailments and remedies. So the students describe the problems with short sentences about what kind of ailments. In this case, ailments are like illnesses, and the remedies for those kinds of illnesses. And at the end, I did like an extension activity. This is a consolidation, and I create with them a song. So when, for example, please scroll down, please. No, the first one, the consolidation. Yes, the last one, consolidation. It's in the next chart.
The next slide, yeah.
Yes.
Over here.
Thank you. For example, this is the song Dr. Rap. So I write the song on the board, and they repeat the song, and they try to complete, for example, 1, 2, how are you? 3, 4, my, and in my, they need to use one of the parts of their body. For example, my head is sore, or my leg is sore. and they need to fix it. When they mention this will fix it, they need to show what can we use to feel this illness or this ailment. So here I can realize if my students are understanding what I'm teaching them.
Yeah, you are checking for understanding at the same time. So awesome.
Yes. And well, we use a platform in the school, and the resources, those are the resources.
Okay, the resort. All right. That is a digital book, Miss Cindy, or
Yes, we have it in physical and also in digital as well. And they have different skills, for example, listening, writing. As you can see, there are some short sentences and words. I all the time work with them with words, and I use them. Later, I teach them the phrases.
Great.
And this book works as well with stickers. So they love the stickers, and they love when I mention the illness and they need to paste the sticker on the book.
Oh yeah, I imagine. All right. So I see that this book integrates the four language skills, right? Listening, speaking, reading, and writing. There are different activities that deal with those. Okay.
Yeah, and this is the platform. So the students can, for example, I have and they need to order to unscramble the word.
Awesome. Yeah, they are practicing. They are practicing at the same time.
All the time.
All right. So thank you so much, Miss Cindy.
Thank you.
Here,
Thank you
yeah, here are the pictures where you applied this approach. Okay, yeah, I love it. Oh my God, what a beautiful experience working with little kids and at the same time applying this innovative approach. So yeah, this is let's say the vivid experience that things can happen in the classroom, that we can work on content having little kids as our target group. So thank you so much, Miss Cindy. So let's take a few minutes and hear any questions our audience has. Please raise your hand.
I would
How
like
much
to read.
time do we
Don't
have?
don't worry about that, because this is the interesting part that we need to get to, because now that you have delivered all the information, now we need our audience, now that the feedback. So we need to see if they are like they understood everything, if they are interested in anything in particular. So we would like to know. So for example, Jose David Berbel Flores, he has one question for Cindy. He says, what are the resources that can be used for the creation of a better fluency in language?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Jose. Well, I want to say that we have different resources in our classroom. For example, in my case, as a private school, we have, for example, flashcards, we have the book, but if we don't have these kinds of resources in our classroom, we can create. So here, the very important thing is to use authentic materials. And with the authentic materials, if we don't have flashcards, so we can look for it. On the internet, we have different resources. For example, in British Council, I try to use all the time the short stories. So my students read a lot on British Council when they don't use the platform. So the interesting thing is to know your students. If your students love stories, so try to look for different activities related to that.
Yeah, thank you. So we have two more questions. One from Maria Herrera. She says, what is the perception about the amount of science knowledge delivered in regular science classes in Spanish? in contrast with science clear lesson? Like, what is the difference between these two forms of teaching, like regular science and in Spanish, and science being taught in clear using this methodology?
The question is for me.
Yes, all of them.
Okay, thank you. Well, related to science class, well, I have the opportunity to work as a science teacher and also to teach science in English in one of the activities. So the difference, I think, is in terms of the terminologies, in terms of the concepts. For example, in a science class, I focus a lot on the concepts. And in a science activity, what I look for is just for the vocabulary, for them to learn.
And here we have another question from Daniela Vanessa Herrera. She says, it's great the way you teach English to those children, but I have a question for you. What methods you use to improve their reading and writing abilities or skills?
Well, thank you. Thank you for your comments, Daniela. And well, what kind of methods I use? The first method, for example, in kindergarten, it depends on the grade as well. In kindergarten, what I use is the total physical response. I use my gestures, my body language to teach them, and they repeat what I do in the classroom. And for example, to improve their reading, in kindergarten, we don't have reading as for example, in third, fourth, or fifth grades, but we teach them just words or short phrases. And for the writing abilities in kindergarten, I need to be honest, I don't teach or I don't focus on writing, because at that moment, what I need is that my students can communicate. So I just focus on teaching the vocabulary. And in the primary school, I teach them reading and writing through a platform. Maybe you know them. You know it is Mayon platform. So the students read the story and they can listen as well the story. And then they can create like graphic organizer or short conclusion about what they just read.
Professor Vasquez, maybe he has a question or a comment. Go ahead, Professor.
Thank you so much, Mr. Lemos. Cindy, hi, welcome, and thank you so much for sharing your great experience with your students. There is a particular issue that I have seen and have noticed with students in general. When they do internship programs, they face a completely different reality. The reality is that they are watching and evincing the teaching of the English language in Spanish. So what would be, from your experience, a recommendation that you give to students? Because they are the ones that in the near future are going to be facing those students. For example, you picture a great methodology, and let's say it can be used in bilingual schools. They have the opportunities, they have the resources, they have the media. And for example, if you're talking about fifth grade, at least a fifth grade student have been learning English at least 5 years ago if they are in the same school. So they have a lot of advantages. So you have to do some instructions or modelings in order to continue achieving the proposed goals. So if you turn, if you do a 180 degrees turn into those schools that doesn't have this opportunity, what it would be the recommendation? Can still they use clear method and what it would be the like the hope you give to those students? Thank you so much. And sorry if it's a really hard question, okay?
Thank you so much for your question. And yes, that makes me
So
reflect.
sorry, Profe Lemus, you're sharing your. Yeah, can you go back to the slide? Sorry.
Yes,
Yeah,
thank you
continue,
for the
please,
question.
Cindy.
Don't worry. Thank you for the question. First of all, yes, I have reflected a lot about it. Before working on this private school, I worked with the students with low incomes, and maybe they didn't have the same level as my students have right now. And yes, I need to be honest, it was very hard, it was very difficult, and it was a challenge for me to work with them. But what I tried to do with Clio was to work with them about projects. So everything was related to projects. If I was teaching something related to health in this case, I teach them through what they have in this at that moment, with the resources that they have at that moment. For example, they bring some cardboards and they explain, but with the same methodology or very similar to the methodology that I use with my students in kindergarten. So if they don't have the high level to learn English, so I try to start with them from the very beginning. So that was the first thing that I did with them. And I know that all the time we don't have the same resources. I know that clearly it could be a challenge for us if we don't have how to deal with it. But what I can tell you is, first of all, try to know to your students, try to know your environment. And then you can look for the things that can work with that.
And finally, we have another question right here. Have you thought of carrying out this methodology with low-income children?
Yes, well, I think that it was pretty related to what I just talked about. Yes, I thank you, Gabriela, for the question. Yes, I have worked with these kinds of students. And well, what I can say is that I continue learning about this method. Is not easy. We need to be honest. Lorraine loved this method and I love it as well because it works with different kinds of students, but we need to know the very the strategies that we can use with this method. We need to create for example, if we need to create a new lesson plan for them, if it's necessary, we need to apply it again.
Here we have Professor Romero. He wants to say something.
Yes, Mr. Lemos, I would like to add something regarding that question that Gabriela just asked, right? She mentions about low-income children, right? Something that I want to highlight is that I work as an English teacher at a public school, right? And my master dissertation was focused on how to teach arts, right, at a public school with 8th graders. And I gathered very successful students, successful results, outcomes, but taking into considerations the resources that students have, right? Our class was mainly focused on cómo estampar, right? It was easy for them like to look for the fabric that we used to do that, right? And that was an amazing experience. So I strongly believe that this method, this approach is not far from taking it to these public scenarios, right? Despite the resources that we lack. So thank you very much.
Okay, thanks to all of you, to all the participants. Thank you, Lorraine. Thank you, Cindy. Here, Mr. Renau, he wants to say
Professor
something.
Renau.
Okay, sorry. I just wanted to mention to add something to the little part in which Gabriela is asking about low income population, but I'm going to actually say this from my personal experience, and it is that usually these low income students attend a public schools, at least the case of Colombia, right? And I wouldn't say that too many schools can implement CLEO. Talking about public schools, usually we see that it's private institutions, the ones that actually have the other subjects taught in, I mean, content subjects taught in English, like science, mathematics, social studies. Those are the ones that more commonly we can see. Now, when we go to international schools, we can see that they have like a bilingual curriculum. However, focusing more on the public schools and the low-income population, I mean, hardly ever will they receive something about CLEO. We will have like very, I would say, timid approaches to that sort of approach, but it's not like the most common finding that sort of stuff, mainly because what Jorge said, I mean, the resources, materials, usually that comes from the government, and probably the government provides what they think is actually good for the students. However, as Cindy was saying, we need to actually get to know the population, and for the government to get to know every single student at all the schools in the country is sort of hard. So we would say like that would be more on the part of the teacher to actually bring these resources or design the resources or get the resources from the internet and bring them to the classroom so that they can actually extend the teaching of the language to the teaching of the content, right? So I would say it's more like what the teacher can make for them rather than what the public schools can actually include in their curriculum. And also taking into consideration that most of the curriculum is actually determined by the Ministry of Education. So that's what I wanted to add.
Thank you, Professor. Now, okay. Lorraine, anything else to add here?
Well, I don't think so. I think my
Sorry, one student, Alexis Disales, he has a question he wants to ask. Go ahead, Alexis.
All right, thank you so much for the opportunity. I've been here listening for a while, and just I want to say congratulations to the teacher. You're doing extremely job, Cindy Paula. That's awesome, and congratulations. I've listened about what you're doing extremely well, and about the vocabulary that you're doing indoor in classes with the student, indoor and outdoor, and those students living outside. The question is, what is your main focus for the student to improve their pronunciation other than just vocabulary? Because that's very important. People only teaching about vocabulary in a list, and usually for the student learning one by one. And sometimes this question just born down the students about many topics, but just about topics, in this case, just vocabulary. What's the main focus for the student to improve their pronunciation other than just vocabulary? It's very important pronunciation. That's the way you communicate each other. So that's my question for you. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your comments, Alexis. And well, that is a very good question. Thank you for asking. Well, related to the pronunciation, what I do is that, well, my students in kindergarten and maybe in primary school, they don't know about how to pronounce some words or the phonetics, as for example, we are learning about. So what I do is that there are some pages in the book that are related to phonics. So my students learn to practice, if, for example, if we are talking about the TH sound, so they try to pronounce it, the. So that is one of the things that I use with them with songs. Through songs, I teach them phonics. And maybe at that moment, they don't realize that they are learning pronunciation through phonetics, but with sounds, they can repeat and repeat, and they can listen, and they can practice a little bit pronunciation as well. And also with the readings.
Thank you, that's cool.
Okay, Lorraine, once again, would you like to add something?
Well, thank you so much, students and professors. So you were so motivated, you were participating, very, very good. I'm glad to know that. I'm glad to notice that. Thank you so much, Cindy. Believe me, what a meaningful experience. I'm sure that all of us learned from you. And well, that's it. That is the end of our presentation. Thank you, Professor Lemus.
Don't worry. Bueno, yo creo que hemos alcanzado el final de estos eventos. Yo creo que ha sido 2 días bastante productivos. La presentación de ayer, bastante productiva con todos los participantes. Hoy con nuestros profesores del énfasis haciendo esta importante disertación aquí sobre metodologías para enseñar el inglés, más allá de concentrarse en una, sino mirar ese espectro amplio. Creo que nuestros estudiantes han salido, digamos, bastante recargados para terminar el semestre y continuar con el próximo. Quiero felicitar a todas las personas que participaron, al profesor Henao por hacer esto posible en cuanto a la gestión de aspectos técnicos. Quiero agradecer a los profesores del pedagógico y a los profesores del énfasis por el compromiso, es decir, por estar aquí sentados 4 horas ayer y otras 4 horas acá. Agradecer a los estudiantes por conectarse a tiempo, incluso mucho antes de la hora prevista, por participar. Siento que ha sido uno de los proyectos de aula con un mayor número de presentaciones y de preguntas y de inquietudes en el chat, lo cual es un buen índice e indica que los estudiantes están, digamos, atentos y despiertos frente a las inquietudes que están presentando los ponentes, sean del programa o como la profesora Cindy, invitados, o como los profesores del énfasis que con mucho amor y con mucha dedicación prepararon la presentación para orientar a los que hablan inglés y a los que no hablan inglés todavía, pero llegarán a ese punto, no se preocupen, en este proceso de aprendizaje. No sé si el profesor Henao quiera compartir algunas palabras de cierre para terminar el evento.
Bueno, sí, mientras Juan Carlos estaba dando las gracias, yo también estaba dándolas ahí en el chat, de todos modos. Pero sí, una vez más, esto es un espacio para ustedes, para los estudiantes, de verdad, les agradecemos mucho, enormemente su tarea, porque este es donde nosotros podemos ver que de verdad en materia investigativa sí se están recogiendo frutos, se está avanzando y estamos aprendiendo. Obviamente queda mucho camino por recorrer y no me refiero simplemente a la carrera, sino ya en sí a la carrera profesional, ya tanto el tiempo que están en la universidad como lo que ya logren hacer cuando sean unos profesionales en el campo de la educación. Muchachos, recuerden, nosotros somos los llamados a cambiar los modelos educativos, a mejorar la educación en nuestras instituciones, en nuestra ciudad, en nuestro país. Entonces, desde aquí es donde se hacen los pinos para lograr llegar a eso, a ver ese país con la educación que nosotros queremos. Nosotros estamos muy próximos a unas elecciones de presidente y muchas personas hablan de educación y cómo se va a cambiar, pero la verdad es que eso lo logramos nosotros dentro del aula. Entonces, por favor, siempre motívense a ser muy buenos profesionales y también profesionales buenos. Y créanme que entre una cosa y la otra hay una gran distancia. Y le agradezco mucho al profesor Juan Carlos, de verdad no habría sido posible todo esto sin la gestión de él. Y un trabajo de verdad excelente. Aquí vemos los resultados, de verdad, gracias a los profesores del énfasis, gracias a nuestra invitada Cindy Paola, a los profesores que participaron y a todos, absolutamente a todos los estudiantes y docentes del programa. Y una vez más, Paula, ha sido un éxito y seguimos trabajando para que el otro semestre, en 2022-2, sea aún mejor y ya lo podamos hacer como lo venimos haciendo anteriormente antes de la pandemia, de forma presencial. Entonces, profesor, muchas gracias, Cindy, muchas gracias y de verdad nos estaremos viendo para la próxima edición de Paula 2022-2.
Bueno, gracias a todos los participantes. Ya podemos despedirnos. Yo estaré colocando la grabación en YouTube y agregándola al enlace de Google Sites de Paula. Gracias a todos por participar.
Gracias.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Gracias, profe.
Thank you so much, Mr. Lemos. Bye-bye. Have a great night.